Let me be direct with you from the outset. What we are witnessing is not a localized border skirmish or a predictable cycle of regional volatility. It is not the limited, managed escalation that mainstream Western media analysts are desperately trying to frame it as to keep the markets calm. What we are witnessing is the total, irreversible disintegration of the post-Cold War security architecture in the Middle East, occurring in real time, just hours after the final remnants of the existing diplomatic treaties were officially scrapped. I am looking at data and internal diplomatic communications that have been circulating among senior regional security analysts for the past 72 hours, and I need you to look at this with me because what it shows is not a mere failure of diplomacy. It is not a temporary setback in peace negotiations. It is not a move toward a new status quo that favors American interests. What it shows is the deliberate, calculated dismantling of the old order by actors who have determined that the price of the status quo has finally become higher than the price of total disruption. In the next 18 minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly why this collapse was inevitable, why the scrapped treaties were already dead long before the ink dried, and why this explosion of fire across the region is fundamentally changing the global energy landscape in ways that most people still refuse to acknowledge. This is the analysis you need to understand the structural shifts that are now moving faster than the news cycle can report them. Subscribe now if you have not already, because what we are about to cover is based on intelligence that is currently being analyzed by state actors who are already operating on the assumption that this situation is not reversible. Let's start with the historical and geographic context, because we cannot understand the explosion we are seeing today without acknowledging the vacuum that allowed it to form. For decades, the entire regional security framework relied on the presumption of American ubiquity, the idea that the United States would always be the ultimate arbiter, the guarantor of the flow of goods, and the primary sponsor of the regional status quo. This is why it matters. When the foundational assumption of any system, in this case the guarantee of American intervention, is removed, the system does not simply transition to a new version of itself. It collapses entirely because all of the secondary actors who were holding their positions in expectation of that guarantee are suddenly forced to reevaluate their entire survival strategy. To put this in perspective, the naval theater in question is one of the most geographically constrained bottlenecks on the planet. We are talking about choke points where the width of navigable channels for heavy freight is measured in single-digit kilometers. When you have a massive, carrier-centric naval force trying to project power in an environment that is optimized for and saturated with anti-access and area denial A2/AD capabilities, you are not talking about a conventional conflict. You are talking about a mathematical trap. This means the strategic advantage has shifted fundamentally toward those who can deny the space rather than those who wish to command it. According to recent reports from regional defense intelligence, the tactical environment has become so saturated with sensor networks and precision-guided deterrence that the standard American doctrine of freedom of navigation operations has become a significant liability. Admiral James Stavridis has stated publicly in previous assessments that the risk of a high-intensity, low-warning engagement in these waters is at the highest level since the end of the Cold War. Subscribe if you are watching this and realizing you are not getting this level of analysis anywhere else. Now let's talk about what the regional actors actually built while the world was focused elsewhere. Announcement number 1, the abandonment of the maritime security protocols. And this one matters more than anything else because it signifies the end of the coordinated international oversight that kept these waters open for the last 4 decades. This is not just a diplomatic change, it is the removal of the guardrails that prevented direct state-on-state contact in the most sensitive trade artery on Earth. We are seeing the rapid deployment of decentralized, low-signature naval assets that are specifically designed to operate in shallow, congested waters. These are not assets designed to fight a symmetric battle against a superpower fleet. They are designed to make the cost of that fleet's presence prohibitively expensive. When you calculate the cost of a modern guided missile destroyer against the cost of a fleet of low-cost, smart mine-deploying autonomous underwater vehicles, the economic equation of power projection breaks down. According to reporting by Defense Security Asia, and confirmed by multiple regional military observers, the current density of these defensive assets in the Strait has reached a threshold where the American Naval Command can no longer guarantee the safety of commercial shipping without a massive and politically unsustainable surge in assets. Received. That is announcement number 1. Announcement number 2, the systematic unraveling of the regional normalization treaties. This is the part that even the most optimistic mainstream analysts have been forced to acknowledge has hit a point of no return. We are not just talking about a suspension of talks, we are talking about the withdrawal of diplomatic recognition mechanisms that were intended to be the pillars of a new regional security architecture. This development is not a minor diplomatic spat. It is a fundamental realignment. And when you understand the connection between this diplomatic withdrawal and the concurrent naval buildup, it becomes a critical issue because it proves that the regional powers have collectively decided to pursue strategic depth outside of the American orbit. Stay with me because this is where the narrative completely changes and where the realization that we are looking at a permanent shift in regional power dynamics becomes impossible to ignore. Announcement number 3, and this one almost nobody in the mainstream media is connecting correctly: the acceleration of the energy trade decoupling. While the focus has been on the military fire, the real story is that the oil and gas flow is being rerouted entirely away from Western insured shipping lanes. The reason the diplomatic treaties collapsed is the same reason the military deterrence failed. The regional exporters no longer see the American-led maritime security order as a benefit, they see it as a volatile and ultimately unnecessary cost. When you remove the dependence on the dollar-denominated security architecture, the necessity for the treaties themselves disappears. Received. That is announcement number 3. Now let's talk about what is really happening behind the headlines, because there are two stories playing out simultaneously, and the mainstream media is only covering one of them. They are covering the explosion of violence as a security crisis while ignoring the deeper reality that the regional actors are using this crisis as a smokescreen to finalize a total divorce from the American economic and security umbrella. The administration in Washington responded by calling for an emergency session of regional partners, demanding a return to the status quo. This has not notably changed the position of any of the regional stakeholders. Think carefully about what this represents. When the United States demands a security alignment, and its primary regional partners not only refuse but actively coordinate with the very powers the U.S. is trying to contain, that is not ambiguity. That is not diplomatic nuance. That is a verdict. It is a clear, unambiguous statement that the era of unquestioned American hegemony in this theater is over. If you operate a business, manage a portfolio, or rely on global supply chains for your daily life, what is happening right now in this region is not just a foreign policy story. It is a cost of goods story, it is a currency stability story, and it is a fundamental shift in the global energy price floor. This pattern has repeated throughout history, and every time it repeats, the outcome is the same. Look at the Soviet experience in Afghanistan in the 1980s. A superpower, convinced of its own tactical superiority, was bled dry by an adversary that understood the terrain, the local political reality, and the limits of the superpower's long-term endurance. Both sides entered the conflict with fundamentally different objectives. The superpower wanted to maintain control, while the adversary wanted to make control impossible. The result was not just a military failure, it was a systemic exhaustion that accelerated the collapse of the power itself. The parallel here is becoming exact. The current power is attempting to maintain a status quo that the local environment and the regional actors have already decided to discard. So, where does this leave us? Let me give you 3 clear paths, because there is no honest middle ground here. Path 1, a managed face-saving retreat. This would require the United States to unilaterally accept a diminished role, allow regional powers to handle their own security, and shift its focus entirely to containment. The conditions required for this are virtually non-existent in the current political climate in Washington. The likelihood of this path is very low. Path 2, a slow-motion, forced eviction. This is the scenario where the continued incremental escalation leads to a catastrophic incident involving a major naval asset, forcing a massive, chaotic, and unplanned withdrawal under fire. The triggers for this are already in the water. The consequences would be a regional conflict that would make the energy shocks of the 1970s look like a minor market correction. Path 3, the new normal of high-friction coexistence. In this scenario, the U.S. attempts to maintain a presence while being effectively paralyzed by the new regional defensive reality, leading to a decade of tension, economic decoupling, and a slow, painful loss of influence. I think we are closer to Path 2 than the headlines suggest. The momentum of the current deployments and the absolute hardening of positions indicate that we are past the point where diplomatic off-ramps are viable. But I must add a caveat: these actors are rational in their own terms. They do not want total war, but they are clearly willing to accept the risk of it if that is what it takes to break the status quo. Here are the questions I want you to take away. If the U.S. cannot enforce its security mandates in a single critical strait, what does that say about its ability to maintain its global alliances elsewhere? If the regional powers have already successfully decoupled their energy trade, what remains of the petrodollar security model? And finally, are you prepared for a world where your local energy and goods costs are no longer tethered to a managed global stability, but to a volatile, multipolar reality? Tell me in the comments what you think the administration does next. Do they double down, or do they look for an exit? Tell me if you think we are on path 2, as I suspect, or if I am overestimating the resolve of the regional actors. We will keep tracking every development in the Strait of Hormuz and the wider region. That is what we do here every single day. Subscribe now. Share this analysis with everyone in your network who is trying to understand why the headlines are not adding up. Turn on notifications so you do not miss the next update, and we will see you in the next analysis.